I pulled the trigger first, but the stallion saved my life. Tonight, True Wild West Stories brings you a tale of dust, blood, and the full moon, where a lone cowboy named Ethan followed a black horse into the unknown and stumbled upon something far darker than legends. They say the Black Stallion only rides under the full moon. But what if it was never a legend to begin with? What if someone wanted it that way? The wind on the plains didn't whisper. It howled, dry, restless, and full of the scent of old dust and grass. Ashwood, a speck of a town on the edge of nowhere, offered little comfort to strangers. And yet, Ethan Cole had ridden straight into it with nothing more than a saddlebag and a fire behind his ribs that hadn't cooled in years. He tied his horse outside the only tavern still lit and pushed through the swinging doors. A few heads turned, none too welcoming, and the barkeep gave him a long look before nodding toward a seat near the stove. "Name's Martha," the woman behind the counter said as she poured him a cup of black coffee so strong it could peel paint. Her apron was dusty, her hair pinned back in a bun that had given up hours ago. "We rent rooms upstairs. Nothing fancy, but clean. Safe enough, if you don't mind stories." Ethan raised a brow. "What kind of stories?" Martha leaned in, her voice dropping a notch. "Out on the East Ridge, there's a broken-down feed barn. Folks say it's haunted. Some call it the work of a cursed Mustang, black as coal. Shows up in the wind, spooks cattle, even killed a man once. Least, that's what old Tom says. I say he drank too much corn mash and saw his own shadow." He chuckled under his breath. "I don't scare easy." "Good," she replied, handing him a key. "Room 2, and keep your boots off the sheets." Later that night, after settling into the creaky cot and lighting the lantern beside him, Ethan still couldn't shake her words. Cursed Mustang? Shadows in the wind? He'd heard worse around campfires, but something in Martha's tone wasn't storytelling. It was warning. He needed the work. A rancher named Garrett had posted a notice about needing hands, and Ethan aimed to start in the morning. But until then, he volunteered to watch the cattle penned near the edge of town, more to earn trust than money. So there he sat, coat wrapped tight, hat pulled low, watching the cattle settle as the wind tugged at the grass. The sky was deep ink, stars dulled by drifting clouds. Then it happened. Just beyond the flickering glow of his lantern, something moved, quick, silent, too tall to be a coyote, too smooth to be a man. He stood, there, by the ruined feed barn, a shape, blacker than the night itself, sliding through the shadows with a grace that sent goose flesh crawling across his neck. No sound of hooves, no snort, just a presence, there, then gone. Ethan stepped forward, lantern raised, heart thudding. Wind stirred the broken shutters on the barn. A hinge squealed. He moved closer, boots crunching dry earth, the cattle behind him growing restless. Then he saw it, beneath the moonlight, faint but clear. A hoof print. Sharp, deep, fresh, pressed into ground hard enough that even a boot couldn't leave a mark. He crouched down, fingers brushing the edge of the print. Still damp, still warm. His breath caught. Son of a... The wind rose, sharp and sudden, like a breath drawn in by something watching. Ethan stood slowly, eyes scanning the darkness. He wasn't a boy spooked by tales, but this wasn't normal. He turned back, casting a long glance at the barn. Something had been here, and it would be back. The next evening, the tavern glowed amber with lamplight and cheap whiskey. Smoke hung in lazy ribbons above the heads of tired men, and someone picked a slow, sorrowful tune on a dusty guitar in the corner. The air was thick with the weight of long days and longer stories. Ethan leaned on the bar, nursing a glass of watered-down bourbon. His eyes drifted to a man sitting alone at a table near the hearth, fingers stained with tobacco, hat brim pulled low. Martha caught Ethan's glance. "That's Amos Turner," she muttered under her breath. "Rodeo rider once. Now he drinks more than he talks, unless you poke the wrong topic." Ethan tapped his glass, voice calm. "What kind of topic?" Martha just shrugged. "You'll see." The moment came when the music stopped and the room slipped into that peculiar silence that only happens in small towns, where everyone knows each other and newcomers are made to feel it. Ethan, reckless in the way only young men with something to prove can be, cleared his throat. "I saw something near the old barn," he said, loud enough to cut through the lull. "Looked like a horse. Black. Fast." A scoff sliced through the air like a whip crack. "Amos." The old man raised his head, revealing a face weathered like cracked leather, and eyes that had seen too much dust, blood, and regret. He took a long drag from his pipe, exhaled slow, and chuckled, not kindly. "You saw a ghost, boy." Ethan didn't blink. "I saw a horse. Then you're dumber than you look." Amos leaned forward, pipe clenched tight in his teeth. "You ever hear a gallop without hooves? Feel your bones rattle from a beast that ain't flesh no more?" The bar fell silent. Even the bartender paused mid-polish. Ethan stood his ground. "What is it then?" Amos reached into the pocket of his tattered coat and pulled out a small, rusted object. He tossed it onto the table with a clink. A spent bullet casing, old and worn. "Shot that 20 years back," Amos growled. "Out by Dead Man's Hollow. I was tracking mustangs. Found tracks like you. Followed 'em through fog and thorn. Heard it breathing behind me, real close." He paused, staring into the fire like it could show him the past. "I turned. Nothing. Shot anyway. Bullet vanished into air like piss on a skillet. Next thing I knew, I was face down in the dirt, ribs cracked, horse gone, and that shell lying next to me. Thing threw me without ever touching me. Someone near the window muttered a prayer." Ethan glanced down at the shell. It looked ordinary, but the way Amos stared at it, like it still burned his fingers, gave it weight. "You think it's cursed?" Ethan asked. "I think it don't belong in this world." Amos's voice dropped low. "And I think anyone fool enough to go looking deserves what he finds." He stood then, with a groan of old bones and pride, and slammed his palm against the table, making the glasses jump. "Don't be stupid, kid. Leave it alone." The room flinched, but Ethan didn't move. Not out of defiance, but curiosity. Behind them, unnoticed in the flickering light, a boy sat alone in the corner booth. Eli, small, quiet, and almost invisible. His face was shadowed, but his eyes gleamed, bright, eager, strange. He'd heard every word, and he was smiling. Morning light spilled over Ashwood like melted gold, warming the brittle edges of old wood and filling the alleyways with a hazy promise of something not yet named. Behind the boarding house, near the crooked fence and the fly-buzzed cow pen, Ethan crouched near the trough, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. A rustling came from behind a pile of hay. "Hey, Ethan!" a voice chirped, young, cracked with excitement. It was Eli, barefoot, dusty, and grinning like he'd just discovered gold. The boy skidded to a stop and thrust a crumpled sheet of paper into Ethan's hands. "Look!" Ethan blinked, holding the torn notebook paper. Across it were scribbles, thick, clumsy lines drawn with charcoal. Circles, X's, arrows pointing this way and that. Most of it looked like a child's drawing of a thunderstorm.
What am I looking at?
It's the trail, Eli said, puffing his chest. From the black horse. I've been watching it for weeks. Every time I see it, I mark where it goes. These are hoof prints. That X right there. That's the ridge above Miller's Creek. Ethan stared at the paper, a chuckle rumbling in his chest. Looks more like a spilled ink bottle than a map. But Eli's face didn't fall. His eyes sparkled. I'm telling you, it saved me once. Ethan raised an eyebrow. The horse? Eli nodded fiercely. Last spring, I was looking for bird nests near the gulch, right? And this rattler, big one, came right at me. I froze, couldn't move. Then out of nowhere that black horse gallops past, kicks a stone, spooks the snake. Saved my hide. Ethan wanted to laugh, but the way Eli said it, wide-eyed and trembling a little in memory, made him pause. Or maybe it was just a horse, Ethan said softly. Or maybe, Eli said, stepping closer, it's something more. You saw it too, didn't you? Before Ethan could answer, Martha's voice barked from the back porch. Eli Brooks, what did I tell you about bothering guests? Eli winced. Sorry, Miss Martha. She descended the steps, apron dusted with flour, hair pinned up tight. Her face was stern, but the way she looked at Eli, like a storm hiding sunlight, betrayed a reluctant fondness. He's always running his mouth about that damn horse, she said to Ethan. Drawing nonsense, scaring the hens. Eli tried to hide the map behind his back. Martha snatched it. Trash, she muttered, then sighed and shoved it back into Eli's shirt pocket with less force than her tone suggested. Boy's gonna get himself lost one day. Ethan shrugged. Could be worse things to chase. She looked at him sharply. Then, after a pause, reached into her apron and pulled out a small dented oil lamp, portable, palm-sized, with a nearly empty wick. Take this, she said gruffly. Works if you shake it first. Ethan accepted it, surprised. Thanks. I'm not thanking you, Martha snapped. I'm giving you light in case you're dumb enough to follow him. She turned and disappeared back inside, muttering about fools and curses. Eli grinned. She likes you. Ethan smirked. That what you call it? They sat in the sun a while, letting the moment settle. The scent of hay, manure, and morning sweat hung in the air. Chickens scratched at the dirt nearby, and a breeze stirred the grass on the hill. You really think it's the same horse Amos talked about? Ethan asked. Eli's face grew serious. I don't know. But I think it's waiting for something. Maybe someone. Ethan looked down at the map again. Those clumsy lines, they seemed to mean everything to the boy. That afternoon passed like molasses in winter. Ethan tried to busy himself with chores, but his mind kept drifting. To Amos's haunted eyes, to Eli's eager grin, and most of all, to the black blur that had vanished into the night. As dusk fell, Eli reappeared holding 2 apples and a slingshot. You comin'? He asked, tossing one to Ethan. Ethan caught it, weighed it in his hand. What if we don't find anything? Eli shrugged. Then we get a walk under the stars. And somehow that felt like reason enough. The night clung to their shoulders like a damp coat, heavy and quiet except for the persistent wail of wind threading through the gorge. Ethan held the flickering oil lamp close to his chest, one hand resting lightly on Eli's shoulder as they navigated the narrow trail. The path curved sharply along a ridge where jagged rocks jutted out like broken teeth. Beneath them, the ravine opened into blackness. Every few feet, loose pebbles skittered down the cliffside, vanishing into the dark. Still sure about this? Ethan muttered. Eli nodded, more brave than he probably felt. The hoof prints go this way. See? He pointed to a faint disturbance in the dirt, a crescent-shaped mark barely visible by the lantern's glow. Ethan squinted. Could be anything, or it could be him, Eli whispered. The horse. Ethan didn't argue. He just kept walking, boots crunching lightly over gravel. Each gust of wind carried whispers from the rock walls, echoes that made the boy tense and Ethan glance over his shoulder. The night was too quiet. They moved carefully, 1 foot at a time, until the gorge narrowed. Walls of stone rose higher, crowding out moonlight. The lamp flickered and dimmed. I think it's this way, Eli said, pushing ahead. Slow down, Ethan warned, reaching out. Too late. The ground gave way. Eli! Eli cried out as the edge crumbled beneath him. In one swift motion, Ethan dropped the lamp and lunged, grabbing the boy's arm as he slid. Dirt and rocks tumbled past their boots, echoing into the black. For a moment, Ethan felt the full weight of the boy dragging him toward the edge. Then, stability. His other hand found a root, his boots braced against a buried stone. Don't move, he grunted, hauling Eli up inch by inch. When they collapsed back onto the ledge, both were panting, covered in dust and shaking. You all right? Ethan asked, voice hoarse. Eli nodded, barely. Then came the sound. Click. A metallic, deliberate sound that echoed across the rocks like a church bell in a funeral. The sound of a hammer being pulled back. Ethan froze. He reached slowly for the lamp, but the light had gone out. In the distance, just past the bend, something moved. A shadow not shaped like stone or tree. The silhouette standing upright. And then, another. Get down, Ethan hissed. He pulled Eli behind a wide boulder, heart pounding in his throat. The boy didn't ask questions, he just obeyed. From their hiding place they watched. Above them, on the upper ledge, 2 figures stood. One held a lantern, its orange glow casting long arms across the rock wall. The other carried a rifle. Ethan's fingers brushed the handle of his knife. He didn't have a gun on him. Stupid, he thought, but it wouldn't have helped at this range. Whoever they weren't lost travelers. The one with the rifle scanned the path below. You hear that? A gruff voice muttered. Thought I saw something move. Wind plays tricks, the other replied. Still, boss said to keep watch. That horse has got 'em spooked. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What boss? Eli's breath hitched softly beside him, but he didn't make a sound. Above, the 2 men turned away, vanishing into the dark. A few seconds passed. Then, from somewhere behind the ridge, a sudden gust swept through. And in that fleeting moment, just before the wind died, Ethan saw it. A figure, sleek, silent, darting between 2 rocks. The black horse. Not running, watching. Then gone. Ethan exhaled and leaned close to Eli. When I say run, he whispered, you don't look back. The boy nodded, and together they pressed deeper into the shadows. The morning sun fought its way through a low-hanging mist, casting long shadows over the rusted rails that crisscrossed the overgrown field. Weeds sprouted from gravel, curling up between splintered ties like nature reclaiming what man had forgotten. The train yard hadn't seen movement in years, but something about it still felt tense, like it remembered the sound of pistons and the smell of blood. Ethan stepped lightly over a rail, his boots crunching softly on stone. Beside him, Eli trailed close, eyes wide. They'd followed the hoofprints here, faint impressions in the dew-heavy grass, leading straight toward the old switching station. "Why would a horse come all the way out here?" Eli whispered. Ethan didn't answer. His hand rested on the grip of his revolver, a dull weight on his hip that felt heavier with every step. Then came the voice, low, gravelly, and thick with disdain. "You boys are trespassing." Ethan froze. From behind a stack of warped rail ties stepped a man with shoulders broad as a barn door and a jaw like granite. His gray Stetson cast a sharp shadow across a weathered face. One hand gripped a rifle. The other hung relaxed. Too relaxed. "This land belongs to Silas Grant," the man barked. "And I don't remember signing any guest book." Eli took a step back. Ethan didn't move. "Didn't see your name carved into the rocks," Ethan said calmly. The man's eyes narrowed. "You must be Cole, the stray cowboy sniffing after ghosts. Guess you're Silas." "You guess right." Silas took a step forward. "And I don't take kindly to strangers sticking their noses where they don't belong." Ethan's hand slid casually toward his holster. "I'm not here to start trouble," he said. Silas snorted. "You already have." Then, without warning, he raised the rifle. Eli shouted, "Ethan!" But Ethan was faster. His revolver barked once. A sharp metallic clang rang out as the bullet struck true, right on the barrel of Silas's rifle, knocking it sideways. Sparks flew. Silas staggered back, more shocked than hurt. "Mother!" Silas growled, checking the scorched metal. Ethan stood his ground, gun still raised, eyes steady. "That was your warning." Silas's face darkened like a storm rolling in. He tossed the damaged rifle aside and drew his own pistol. Now they both stood square, guns drawn 10 paces apart. Wind rustled the grass. A hawk cried overhead. "You got grit, boy," Silas said. "Shame it won't keep you breathing." Before either could move, a door slammed in the distance. A woman shrieked. Somewhere beyond the trees, someone had heard the gunshot, and the town was waking up. But neither man looked away. Then, a sound broke the moment. "Hee-yah!" The cry of a horse, long, sharp, echoing across the prairie like a trumpet from some ancient war. It wasn't a normal whinny. It carried something else. Rage, warning, or maybe grief. Silas flinched. Ethan didn't. The sound came again, closer this time. Hooves pounded faintly, just beyond sight. The grass swayed where no wind touched. Silas's eyes flicked toward the tree line. "You hear that?" he muttered. Ethan nodded. "Yeah." A beat passed. Silas lowered his gun. "This ain't over," he spat. "Stay out of my way, Cole, or next time I won't miss." He backed off, slow and tense, then turned and disappeared into the mist, boots stomping through grass and gravel. Eli let out the breath he'd been holding. "What the hell was that?" the boy asked. Ethan holstered his weapon. "A man who's scared of something, and a horse that don't like being followed." They both turned to look toward the sound, but the field had fallen quiet again, too quiet. The morning sun crept over the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the yard behind Martha's Inn. Beans lay drying on large burlap sheets, their nutty scent mingling with the bitter aroma of fresh coffee. Roosters crowed in the distance. A breeze stirred loose straw, and the gentle clatter of wooden spoons echoed faintly from the kitchen. Ethan sat on an old crate, elbows on his knees, a cup of coffee in hand. His mind was still back at the abandoned tracks, at Silas Grant's voice, and the sound of that eerie horse in the mist. Martha stepped out from the back door, apron dusted with flour. wiping her hands on a rag. She looked around, then leaned in close. "Silas," she said softly, "hasn't just been chasing shadows." Ethan glanced up. "He's been scaring folks off their land," she went on, her voice just above a whisper. "Spreading stories, making 'em think that black horse is some ghost. But it's all part of the game." "What game?" "Land." Her eyes narrowed. "He wants the grazing rights. Wants the valley cleared. You let people get scared enough, they sell cheap, or they run." Ethan frowned. "That explains a few things." Just then a familiar cough cut through the morning air. Amos approached, carrying a chipped mug and a scowl that hadn't softened since sunrise. "I told you to leave it be," the old man muttered. "Now you're sittin' in the sun talkin' treason." Martha ignored him. "He's not the only one who sees what's happening." As if on cue, 3 neighbors appeared at the edge of the yard, an older woman with a shawl, a bearded man holding a crumpled paper, and a younger rancher, eyes tired but determined. "We've got proof," the bearded man said, unfolding the paper and handing it to Ethan. "He's been buying land through a dummy company. We think he's got someone at the county office helping forge signatures." Ethan scanned the petition. Over a dozen names, shaky but clear. "And the sheriff?" he asked. "Silas bought him years ago," the young rancher muttered. "We can't trust him." Amos shook his head. "You're stirring up a fire you can't put out, boy." Ethan stood. "If everybody keeps their mouths shut," he said, voice rising, "then Silas gets to keep playing king. Folks lose their land, their homes. He wins." He slapped the petition back into the man's hands. "But if we speak up, together, he can't shut us all down." Amos squinted at him. "That kind of talk gets men killed." Ethan didn't flinch. "Maybe. But I didn't come here to watch cowards bow." Martha's eyes gleamed, not with fear, but with something like pride. The others looked to each other, uneasy but hopeful. Then came the scream. It tore through the stillness like a blade, coming from just beyond the bean yard. Everyone turned. A figure stumbled out from behind the woodpile, tall, dirty, clutching his chest. Blood soaked his shirt. He took 2 wobbling steps and collapsed face first into the dirt. Martha gasped. Amos dropped his mug. Ethan was the first to reach him, rolling the man over. He didn't recognize the face. Young, sunburned, terrified. His chest was slick with blood. A gunshot just under the ribs. The man coughed, eyes fluttering open. "Tell Ethan," he choked, barely audible. "They're watching you. Now." And then, nothing. Eli came running from the barn, skidding to a halt. "Is he dead?" he whispered. Ethan stood slowly, eyes scanning the tree line beyond the yard. Whoever had sent that message might still be out there, watching. The small room inside Martha's Inn flickered with amber shadows. The lantern on the table hissed softly, casting. The color was already draining from his face. Ethan crouched close, eyes locked on the man's. "You said someone's watching," he urged. "Who? Who sent you?" The man's lips parted, breath rattling. "Not Silas," he whispered. "The horse, it don't follow him. It chooses." His voice cracked, a bubble of blood slipping down his chin. "What do you mean?" Ethan pressed. The black horse? The man blinked slowly. Then, with shaking fingers, he reached inside his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. His hand trembled as he extended it toward Ethan. Ethan took it gently. The paper was stiff, stained with smears of blood. As he unfolded it, the lantern light revealed a hand-drawn map, faint pencil marks tracing borders, trails, and symbols. In the lower corner, someone had scrawled a name, Red Hollow. "It's a land map," Ethan muttered. Amos stepped forward, squinting at the markings. "That's ranch territory," he said, "mostly abandoned. Except here." He pointed to a cluster of hash marks near the center. "That's where Silas has been buying." All around Red Hollow, the stranger coughed, his whole body racked with the motion. "He wanted the horse," he gasped, "to scare, push people out. But it won't be used." His eyes flared open for a brief second, wild and full of something close to fear. "It knows." Martha pressed her hand against his shoulder. "Shh, you're safe now." But he wasn't. His body sagged. One last breath rattled out. His eyes remained open, frozen in that final, haunted stare. Eli turned away, swallowing hard. Silence filled the room. Then Ethan stood, still holding the map, his jaw set. "He came here to warn us," he said. "This isn't just about fear. That horse, it's real. It's choosing who sees it, who follows it." Martha lit another lamp, setting it on the windowsill. "And someone didn't want him to make it this far." "Or wanted him to," Amos added darkly. "To send a message." Eli looked up. "But he said the horse doesn't obey Silas. That means it's not his, right?" Ethan didn't answer. He moved to the window, eyes scanning the yard outside. The night had turned heavy. Fog rolled low across the ground, curling around fence posts and crates like ghostly fingers. Suddenly, the horses in the stable began to stir. One let out a sharp whinny, another pawed the ground. And then, clear as day, came the heavy exhale of a powerful beast. A f sound, deep and deliberate. They all turned toward the door. The lantern light trembled as the wind picked up outside. Shadows danced on the walls. Then, across the wooden floor, a sliver of darkness shifted, cast by something large just outside. Ethan stepped closer to the window. There, on the far side of the yard, stood a silhouette. Tall, still, horse-shaped, not moving, just watching. The breath caught in Ethan's throat. The black horse had come again. Morning came with a biting chill, the kind that crept into your bones and made even the warmest coffee feel cold by noon. The sky was a dusty gray, and the wind carried the smell of wet stone and pine needles. Ethan adjusted his coat collar and glanced at Amos, who stood silently beside him, staring at the trail ahead. "Last night's hoofprints ended near the old dry creek," Ethan said, his voice low. Amos grunted. "Then that's where we're headed." They rode in silence, the horses' hooves crunching on dry grass and broken twigs. As the trail dipped, the sound of a faint stream reached their ears. The old wooden bridge came into view, narrow, weather-beaten, its planks warped and cracked with time. Below it, water trickled lazily over smooth rocks, barely more than a whisper. "Been years since anyone crossed this thing," Amos muttered. "It's held up longer than most men I've known." Ethan dismounted and crouched near the foot of the bridge. Hoofprints, faint, but there, the same wide, deep impressions from nights before. The black horse had passed through here. But they weren't alone. A branch snapped behind them. Ethan stood fast, hand on his revolver. From the bushes across the bridge, 3 men stepped out. Dusty coats, sunburnt faces, and eyes that didn't blink enough. One held a rifle low, too casual to be honest. Another chewed a toothpick like it was the only thing keeping him from violence. The third had a jagged scar down his cheek and a shotgun across his back. "Turn around," the toothpick chewer called. "Ain't nothing past this bridge worth seeing." "Depends on who you ask," Ethan said, stepping forward. Amos didn't speak, just rested a hand near his hip holster. The man with the scar spat to the side. "You're poking where you don't belong, cowboy." Ethan raised his voice, sharp and cold. "And you're blocking a public crossing." "You want trouble?" the rifleman asked, cocking his weapon. Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he drew, lightning fast, and fired a single shot into the air. The crack echoed through the canyon like thunder. A flock of crows exploded from the trees, wings beating furiously as they spiraled into the sky. The sudden movement startled one of the men, who stumbled backward. His boot caught the edge of the bridge, and for a split second, he hung between balance and gravity. He tipped. "Shit!" Amos lunged, grabbing the man's coat collar just as he dropped. The man dangled above the shallow stream, arms flailing, boots scraping the bridge rail. Amos hauled him back up with a grunt, shoving him down onto the wooden planks. "Next time, watch your damn step," Amos growled. The men hesitated, now unsure. Ethan stepped forward, eyes narrowed. "Go tell Silas his scare tactics don't work on me." The scarred man clenched his jaw, then nodded to the others. They backed off, melting into the trees like shadows. The wind returned, carrying with it the silence they left behind. Amos dusted off his sleeves. "You didn't shoot to kill." "I didn't need to." Ethan walked slowly across the bridge, boots creaking on the ancient wood. Midway, something caught his eye, a tuft of black hair, caught between the splinters of the railing. He reached out and gently plucked it free. Long, coarse, still damp with morning dew. "Horsehair," he whispered, but not from any ordinary horse. Rain whispered on the tin roof, steady and soft, like the sound of distant applause. Inside the cramped room, the lanterns glow through weary shadows across the wooden walls. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, shirt off, wrapping a strip of torn cloth around the shallow cut on his upper arm. The scrape stung, a gift from the scuffle at the bridge. Martha stood near the door, arms folded, face set in a tight frown. Her voice was low but firm. "You should leave, Ethan. Before Silas decides you're worth a bullet." "I'm not running," Ethan muttered, tying the cloth with a grimace. "You're not from here," she continued. "You owe this town nothing. You got your whole life ahead of you. Don't throw it away on ghosts and gangsters." Ethan looked up. "Ghosts don't leave hoofprints." Martha sighed, shaking her head. "Neither do legends. But bullets sure as hell do." A creak in the hallway pulled their attention. Eli stood at the threshold, soaked to the bone, eyes wide and full of something between fear and hope. "Don't go," the boy said quietly. Martha turned toward him. "Eli." "I heard what she said," Eli cut in. "But if you leave, we got no one. Silas wins." Ethan met the boy's eyes. They were the kind that didn't beg, they challenged, like someone too young to know when to quit. "You're brave," Ethan said softly. "No," Eli whispered. "I'm just tired of being scared." The room fell silent again, save for the tap of rain and the occasional groan of wind against the walls. Martha walked past both of them, placed a dry towel on Eli's shoulders, then paused by a small wooden shelf. where a dusty photo frame leaned against the wall. "You remind me of her," she said. Ethan turned. The photo was old and faded. A young woman holding a baby, smiling softly at the camera. "Eli's mother," Martha added. "She died 2 winters ago. Fever took her fast." Eli's gaze dropped. Ethan reached over, lifted the frame and studied it in the lantern light. "She had your eyes," he said to Eli. The boy nodded but didn't speak. Ethan set the photo back, then turned toward the cracked window. Outside, the rain blurred the world into streaks of gray and shadow. The town of Ashwood was no more than a cluster of buildings clinging to fading hope. "Eli," Ethan said, voice steady, "I'm not leaving." The boy blinked. "I made it this far, and maybe I came looking for work or a place to hide. But now—" He reached for his gun belt, resting on the bedpost, his hand lingering on the worn leather grip of the revolver. "Now I've got a reason to stay." Martha watched him closely. "You sure about that?" Ethan nodded. "There's not many things I've been sure of in my life. But this? I ain't letting a man like Silas decide how folks live." He stood, slid the belt across his waist, and tightened the buckle. "I'll protect this town," he said, "and I'll protect this boy." Eli's face lit up with a fierce pride he tried to hide, but couldn't. Ethan walked over, knelt beside him, and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I promise." They stayed like that for a moment, silent, grounded in something more solid than fear. Then came the sound. Clip-clop, slow, deliberate. A single hoofbeat echoed on the roof. Then another. Martha froze. Eli's eyes darted to the ceiling. Ethan reached for his gun. The room filled with tension so thick it stole the air from their lungs. Outside, the hoofbeats continued, slow, pacing, as if something large circled just above them in the rain. Ethan moved to the window, but all he saw was darkness and drizzle. Just then, a gust of wind flung the window open with a bang, sending the lantern's flame dancing. The sound stopped. The roof creaked once more. And then silence. Ethan stepped back, eyes scanning the ceiling as though it might collapse. Whatever was up there, man or beast, it had come to listen. The sun was barely up when Amos motioned Ethan to follow him. They took the narrow trail behind the Hale place, boots crunching against gravel and dead leaves. Morning mist still clung low across the fields, casting a hush over Ashwood like the town itself was holding its breath. Amos didn't say much, just kept walking with that old man limp of his, a piece of jerky clenched in his teeth and a Winchester slung low on his back. They reached the edge of town, where the granary stood like a crooked tooth in the earth, leaning, forgotten, with boards so weather-beaten they looked like they'd fall if you sneezed too hard. "Why here?" Ethan asked, glancing around. Amos spat out the jerky. "Place has been empty since before you were born. No one comes out here." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And that's what makes it interesting?" The old man gave him a look that said, "You'll see." They stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the bitter smell of rusted nails and spoiled grain. Shafts of light pierced through the cracks in the wooden walls, striping the floor in long, golden slashes. Mice scattered underfoot. Cobwebs clung to everything. "Used to store feed and millet," Amos murmured, poking at a collapsed shelf. "Now it's just ghosts and vermin." Ethan moved slowly, eyes scanning the dim space. "What are we looking for?" Amos pointed toward a rusted workbench in the corner. "I saw something here once, back when Silas was just starting to buy folks out." They approached, and Ethan tugged open a warped drawer. Inside lay a jumble of bent nails, worn gloves, and something else, something that didn't belong. "What the hell?" Ethan muttered, lifting it into the light. A small wooden box, carefully latched, covered in black dust. He opened it. Inside were 6 metal horseshoes, painted pitch black. Not just any shoes. These had exaggerated edges, sharpened almost to a spike, with grooves filed into them. Fake hoof prints, Ethan realized. Ones that could leave marks on stone even in dry weather. "Someone's been planting tracks," he said, voice low. Amos nodded grimly. "Ain't no ghost horse makes prints that clean." Beside the box they found 2 small barrels, the tops pried loose. One was filled with thick black paint, hardened around the rim. The other held discarded brushes and rags. Ethan reached in and pulled out a small branding iron, shaped like a hoof print. "This whole legend," Ethan said, "it's a goddamn sideshow." "Silas made fear his fence," Amos said, "and everyone's been too spooked to climb over." As if on cue, a sound echoed across the granary, a sharp clang of metal, like lantern glass knocking against iron. Ethan and Amos froze. "Someone's here," Amos whispered, already raising his rifle. They turned slowly, eyes locking on the granary's main door. It creaked open just enough to reveal a figure, tall, hunched, backlit by the morning haze. They couldn't see his face, but the heavy breath gave him away, rough, labored, like a bull at the end of a long fight. The man stood still, watching. Amos raised his rifle higher. "Show yourself." No response. Ethan stepped forward, hand on his revolver, voice steady. "You planning to shoot or just scare?" Still no reply, just that slow, ragged breathing. Then the man moved a step closer, boot grinding on old wood, shadow growing longer across the floor. Amos whispered, "You feel that?" Ethan nodded. Something ain't right. The stranger's hand reached behind his back just slightly, and both Ethan and Amos raised their weapons in one smooth motion. "Don't," Ethan said. "Whatever you're thinking, don't." The man stalked. His breath hitched. Then slowly he stepped fully into the light, and Ethan's stomach turned. He knew that face, or at least he'd seen it, on a poster nailed to a telegraph pole weeks ago, half torn by wind and time. A wanted man. Not just any man. Silas Grant's oldest enforcer. And he was bleeding. Badly. Blood pooled from his side, trailing down his pants, staining his boots. He wobbled, swayed like a tree about to fall. Then he collapsed, face first, right onto the granary floor. And in his hand, still clutched tight, was a burned scrap of paper. The figure lying sprawled across the granary floor groaned, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Ethan and Amos stood frozen, lit only by the flickering halo of the lantern swinging from a rusted nail on the wall. The stranger had collapsed hard, face first, hand still gripping that charred scrap of paper like it meant something. But it wasn't the blood or the sudden fall that had Ethan's gut in knots. It was the man's face. He knew it. Jared Locke, Silas Grant's right-hand man. Loyal as a hound and twice as mean. Amos swore under his breath. "Hellfire, I thought he was dead." Ethan crouched cautiously, keeping one hand near his sidearm. "Not dead yet." Jared stirred, coughed wetly, then looked up with eyes glassy and mean. "You boys sure do poke your noses where they don't belong." "Why are you here, Jared?" Ethan asked, voice low. The man tried to laugh, but it came out like a rattle in his throat. "Silas said you'd come snoopin'. Told me to send a little message." Amos stepped forward, rifle still raised. "That message in your back pocket or your mouth?" Jared sneered. "Smart mouth, old man. You really think Ashwood's worth savin'? This town's already his. Hell, some of you fools just don't know it yet." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Then why send you bleeding into a granary with a scrap of paper?" Jared's lip twitched. He tried to sit up, failed. He needed a distraction. The lantern's flame flickered again, casting twisted shadows across the wooden beams. Amos took a cautious step to the side, eyes scanning the darkness. "What kind of distraction?" Jared let out a breath that sounded too much like a laugh. "One that keeps you busy long enough to miss the real show." Before Ethan could speak, Jared's hand shot out toward his belt. "Don't!" Ethan barked, stepping forward. Too late. Jared yanked something shiny from his coat, not a gun, but a long, curved blade. He swung clumsily, and Ethan jumped back, tripping over a broken crate. The lantern wobbled on its hook, casting wild arcs of light. Amos raised his rifle, but Jared lunged faster than expected. They collided. The gun flew from Amos's hands and clattered to the floor. Ethan scrambled to his feet as Jared tackled Amos into the side wall. The whole granary shuddered. Dust exploded into the air. Ethan charged, fists clenched. They wrestled hard, 3 bodies in close quarters, scraping against crates and scattered tools. No time for aiming, no room for breathing. Ethan landed a punch square to Jared's jaw. The man stumbled back, dropped the knife, then reached instinctively for his boot. Too slow. Ethan lunged, grabbing the front of his coat, slamming him against a support beam. Wood cracked. And there it was, hanging from Jared's belt, a brass padlock, dark with rust, etched with the unmistakable brand of Silas Grant's ranch. An S, coiled like a snake around a pine tree. "What's this?" Ethan snarled, yanking it free. Jared grunted. That's the key to keeping folks scared." Amos picked himself up, rubbing his ribs. "Silas been planting fake locks now?" Jared's eyes darted between them. Then he muttered, barely above a whisper, "He doesn't need locks when he's got mouths." Ethan frowned. "What are you talking about?" Jared hesitated. Then, eyes narrowing, he said slowly, "Silas has someone right here. In town. Someone you talk to every damn day." The room went quiet. The wind rattled a loose board on the granary wall. Ethan's pulse quickened. "Who?" Jared's mouth opened, but before the words came out, his eyes rolled back and he slumped forward in Ethan's grip, unconscious. "Shit," Amos muttered. "We ain't done with him yet." Ethan lowered him gently to the floor. Outside, the wind howled low and cold through the trees. The lantern flickered one last time, then went out. The beat of the drum rolled across the dry earth like thunder, bouncing off the shop fronts and the weathered church bell that hadn't rung since the last winter frost. Colorful banners fluttered from lamp posts, and the smell of smoked meat, roasted corn, and sweet molasses filled the late afternoon air. Ashwood's townsfolk had come out in full force, faces rosy from sun and cider, laughing children darting beneath hay bale arches, and old folks swaying to the wail of a fiddle on the makeshift wooden stage. It was the harvest fair, the only time of year when the hard edges of ranch life softened just a bit. Ethan stood near the pie stand, arms crossed loosely, watching Eli try and fail to win a sack race. The boy tripped, tumbled into a pile of straw, and came up laughing, a smear of dirt across his cheek. Martha handed him a clean cloth with a mother's frown and a glint of pride in her eyes. "Town ain't looked this alive in months," Amos muttered beside Ethan, holding a tin cup of apple cider. Ethan nodded, though something in his chest sat uneasy. Too alive, maybe. It wasn't the music or the laughter that bothered him. It was the glances, quick and sideways. Too many whispers in corners, eyes that didn't meet when they used to smile. Ever since Jared's collapse in the granary, the town had been stirred, as if something poisonous had seeped into the well of trust, and that poison was about to spill. As the sun dipped below the ridge, casting long shadows over the square, a tall man stepped up onto the stage. It wasn't the mayor nor the preacher, but Mr. Lawton, the owner of the grain mill, and someone respected enough to hush a crowd with just his presence. In his hand, he held a piece of parchment, folded and sealed with wax already cracked from too many fingers. Lawton cleared his throat. "This letter was found nailed to the door of the feed store this morning." A hush fell. He unfolded it, eyes scanning the lines before reading aloud. "To the people of Ashwood," he began, voice steady. "Be warned. Among you walks a liar, a traitor, one who pretends to protect but sells your land, your secrets, your very lives, to Silas Grant. Justice will not wait. You've been watched." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lawton paused, holding the paper out. No name, no signature, but enough venom to start a fire. "Who would write that?" someone near the front asked, tone sharp with fear. "You think it's true?" another voice called. "He's just trying to divide us," a woman shouted, her face flushed from drink or fury. No one could tell. "Maybe not," came another voice. "Maybe someone here's been feeding Silas everything we do." The square erupted in arguing voices, a sudden storm of accusations and suspicions. Friends stared at each other with squinted eyes. Neighbors who'd traded pies and fence wire now looked ready to trade blows. Amos leaned in to Ethan. "Told you it had come to this. Silas ain't just grabbing land. He's grabbing minds." Eli clung to Martha's skirt, eyes wide. "Why are they yelling?" "Because fear makes folks forget who they are," Martha said softly, brushing his hair back. A loud whistle cut through the noise. Sheriff Hale, silver badge glinting under the string lights, stepped onto the platform beside Lawton. His voice, though aged, carried like a rifle shot. "That's enough," he barked. "Ashwood may be many things, but it won't be torn apart by rumors and cowards' notes." The shouting quieted, but the tension hung thick. "We will investigate," Hale continued. "Every name, every whisper. If someone's playing both sides, we'll find 'em. Until then, keep your heads and your hands to yourselves." He stepped down, folded the letter, and disappeared into the crowd. But the music didn't return. The laughter didn't echo. Instead, small clusters of people gathered and murmured, their fare forgotten. Ethan looked around. Something had shifted, and not in the way he'd hoped. Trust, once broken, didn't mend easy. As the last notes of the fiddle died out in the dry wind, Ethan spotted a shadow slipping behind the mayor's office. He narrowed his eyes. Trouble was coming. Again. The wind howled through Red Rock Bluff, kicking up dust and grit that stung the eyes and left a bitter taste in the mouth. The sandstone formations, jagged and sharp like a row of broken teeth, cast long shadows in the late afternoon sun. Ethan crouched behind a boulder, hand gripping his rifle tight, breath steady but tense. Beside him, Amos lay prone with his old Winchester, trained on the narrow pass ahead. His hat was pulled low, the brim trembling ever so slightly in the wind. "They'll come through here," Amos muttered, barely loud enough for Ethan to hear. Only route close enough to the train tracks. Silas always was a creature of habit. Ethan gave a single nod, eyes never leaving the pass. Every second stretched, long, tight as a gun spring. His ears picked up everything. The rustle of a lizard darting through brush, the flap of a distant tarp in town, the metallic creak of his own belt buckle as he shifted. Then came the sound they'd been waiting for, hooves, distant at first, then growing clearer. "They're coming," Ethan said. A half-dozen riders emerged from the far side of the bluff, their silhouettes sharp against the dusty light. Silas was among them, seated tall in the saddle, rifle across his lap. His men flanked him, rough-looking bastards with cruel mouths and twitchy hands. They weren't riding with caution. They were confident, too confident. Ethan waited. Let them come. 30 yards, 20, 10. He raised the rifle, but aimed high. The shot rang out, echoing like thunder against the canyon walls. Panic followed. Silas's horse reared. One of his men dropped his rifle. Another turned his horse and bolted outright, yelling something incoherent as he vanished down a side trail. Ethan stood, exposing himself fully, his voice sharp like flint. "This ends here, Silas." Silas spun his horse and shouted, "Shoot 'em both!" The firefight exploded. Dust, smoke, and the sharp bark of gunfire filled the bluff. Ethan fired methodically, aiming to disarm, to startle, not to kill. Amos's shots cracked clean through the chaos, keeping Silas's men from regrouping. A bullet clipped Amos's shoulder, ripping his sleeve and drawing blood, but he barely flinched. "I'm fine," he growled, teeth clenched. "Keep shootin'." Ethan ducked behind a rock, reloaded, and fired again, striking the rifle from one outlaw's hands. Another went down clutching his leg, howling more from fear than pain. Silas, seeing the chaos unravel, yanked his reins hard and turned tail. "Fall back," he bellowed. "Regroup at the ridge." But no one followed. His men were scattered, confused, or down. Silas galloped away alone, cursing the wind, his black coat flapping like a ragged flag. Ethan ran forward, breath ragged, sweeping the area. 2 of Silas's men were on the ground, alive, injured, and too shaken to fight. He kicked their weapons aside, rifle still trained on them. "You move," he said, "and I won't be aiming wide next time." They froze. Behind him, Amos approached, pressing a cloth to his bleeding arm. "Hell of a shootout," the old man muttered. Ethan exhaled slowly. "It's not done." He turned toward a low barbed wire fence that bordered the bluff. Something had caught his eye, something dark, swaying gently in the wind. He stepped closer. There, snagged on the twisted metal, was a strand of coarse black hair. Not human. Horse. Ethan plucked it free, studying it under the dimming light. "Looks like he wasn't riding alone," Amos said from behind. Ethan didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the strand, heart drumming a slow, heavy beat. Whatever this thing was, this horse, this legend, it was watching them, and it had just left a sign. The fire in the hearth crackled low, painting the walls of the boarding house with flickering shades of amber and gold. Outside, the wind had picked up again, whistling past window shutters like a restless ghost. But inside, warmth held fast, at least for now. Martha Hale stood near the fire, her hands working a rag between her fingers, gaze distant. Ethan sat at the table, shirt still dusted from the bluff, his rifle propped nearby. Amos leaned back in a creaky chair, his arm bandaged tight, while Eli dozed quietly in the corner, his head resting on a folded blanket. The calm felt too quiet, too still. Martha broke the silence. "I should have said something earlier," she muttered, voice low but firm. "Years back, I saw Silas meet with a surveyor out by Dry Creek. They thought no one was watching, but I was picking herbs nearby. Heard him talking about false boundary lines, fake deeds, and payoffs." Ethan straightened. "You saw it yourself?" Martha nodded. Her hand reached into the inside pocket of her apron, and when it came out, it held a small iron key, rusted but unmistakably well kept. "This unlocks the cellar beneath the old mill," she said. "Used to belong to my brother before he passed. Silas used it for storage, left a bunch of crates behind when he moved operations out west. I've been holding on to this key, thinking one day someone brave enough would come along to use it." Amos whistled. "You think there's proof in there?" "I don't think. I know," Martha said, her tone steely. "Receipts, forged claims, maybe even names. I've heard whispers for years, and I've kept a list of folks who saw or heard things. They've been too scared to speak. Till now." She pulled a folded paper from a drawer, laying it gently on the table. Names, dates, places, all scribbled in a firm, steady hand. Ethan stared at it, then looked up at her. "You've been holding this town together longer than any of us knew." Martha shrugged. "Ain't just pies and clean sheets keep folks safe. Sometimes it's the things you don't say, until the right time." Ethan's jaw clenched. "It's time then." "You sure?" Amos asked, raising a brow. "This'll light a fire Silas won't be able to ignore." Ethan picked up the key, weighed it in his hand, then let it burn. For a moment, nothing moved but the fire. Then Martha stepped closer. "There's one more thing," she said softly. "If you go digging into that cellar, don't go alone. He's got eyes everywhere." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "We'll go at first light." But even as he said it, something tugged at the edge of his thoughts. A sound, a shadow. He turned his head slowly toward the window, where the curtain shifted slightly. Not from wind, but from something else. He stood and crossed the room in 3 strides, yanking the curtain aside. Nothing. Just the night. But etched in the dust on the sill was a partial handprint, fresh, pressed into the glass with too much carelessness to be anything but hurried. Amos joined him, frowning. "We've got company." Ethan looked out again, scanning the yard. The wind kicked up a swirl of dead leaves across the path. Someone had been listening, and whoever it was, they knew about the key now. The flags hung motionless in the heavy morning air, like breath held tight in a trembling chest. Ashwood's town square was crowded, faces grim, eyes fixed toward the saloon steps where the sheriff once stood in better days. Now it was Ethan who stood tall beside the empty post, a lone figure marked by dust, weariness, and resolve. Martha stood just behind him, arms crossed, gaze sharp. Amos sat on a crate near the bakery, his rifle cradled across his lap, every wrinkle in his face pulled tight with tension.
Eli clung close to Martha's skirt, eyes darting from face to face. The townsfolk had gathered in near silence, the hush more telling than any shout. Whispers rippled like wind across wheat fields. Fear, hope, something between. Then came the sound. Hooves. Measured, deliberate, like thunder softened through soil. From the south end of town, Silas Grant rode in at the head of 6 men, all armed, faces twisted with smug anticipation. Silas wore his black coat like armor, the silver buttons glinting against the pale sun. A sneer tugged at his lips as he scanned the crowd. "Didn't expect such a turnout," he said, voice low but clear. "Y'all here to see a man hang, or a coward run?" Ethan stepped forward. "Neither," he replied. "We're here to finish this." The square was dead still. Silas dismounted, his boots crunching over the gravel. His hand hovered over the revolver at his side. "You sure, Cole?" he asked. "You really think this town's worth bleeding for?" Ethan didn't flinch. "It's worth more than your money and your fear." A beat of silence. Then Silas drew, but Ethan was faster. A single shot rang out, clean, sharp, final. The bullet struck the hammer of Silas's revolver mid-draw, sending the weapon spinning from his grip and clattering to the dirt. Gasps broke the silence. Silas stared at his hand, then the ground, disbelief cracking across his face. One of his men reached for his rifle. Amos raised his own and cocked it with a click that echoed across the square. The man froze. Ethan didn't say a word. He just stared at Silas, unblinking. That was enough. One by one, Silas's men backed away, their swagger gone, fear replacing bravado. One dropped his rifle outright and turned, fleeing down the road. Another followed. The rest melted into the crowd, no one stopping them. Silas stood alone. His chest heaved. He looked around, no allies, no shadows to hide in, just the eyes of the town, staring back. He turned slowly, picked up his revolver and shoved it back in its holster without meeting Ethan's gaze. Then he mounted his horse, stiff and slow like a man 20 years older. As he turned to leave, no one followed, no one cheered, they just watched, the silence louder than gunfire. But as Silas passed the old schoolhouse on the edge of town, a distant sound rose behind him, a faint, metallic rattle, lacquered brass, horse tack, a lonesome jingle like bells from a forgotten saddle. Ethan turned his head toward the sound. So did Martha, so did Amos. From beyond the hills where the scrubland met the sky, the wind carried the echo of hooves, not from Silas's horse, but heavier, swifter. The black horse. The townsfolk looked to Ethan. He said nothing, but his grip on the rifle eased, and for the first time in days, he smiled. Justice hadn't just won. It had ridden through. The golden light of morning spilled across the plains, bathing Ashwood in a gentle hush that felt like the town had finally exhaled. The grasses danced lazily in the breeze, dew still clinging to their tips. And from the corral came the familiar lowing of cattle being fed. Smoke curled from chimneys again. Not out of fear, but routine. Life, quiet and real, had returned. Ethan stood at the edge of the wooden fence near the pasture, one boot resting on the lower rail. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbows, the bandage on his left arm now little more than a reminder. He watched as Eli raced between the fence posts, waving a wrinkled piece of paper above his head. "I fixed it!" Eli shouted, grinning wide. "The map's done. All the trails, every mark, complete." Ethan chuckled. "That's so. You gonna sell tickets to see it?" "Maybe," the boy replied, then grew serious.
Or maybe I'll keep it for folks who want to remember what really happened." The cowboy nodded, ruffling Eli's hair as he passed. Behind them, the townsfolk were already about their business. A group of men lifted sacks of grain from a wagon. A woman called to her children, pointing them toward the well. Amos leaned against a post, smoking his pipe, eyes half-lidded but watchful. He caught Ethan's gaze, then nodded once, a gesture that said more than words could. Martha stepped out from the porch of the inn, wiping her hands on her apron. "Coffee's hot if you want it," she called, then softer. "You done a good thing, Ethan Cole." He walked toward her, slower now, like he had time again. "They came together," he said. "They made the choice. I just stood with them, and that's what made the difference." Silas Grant had been taken out of town at sunrise, under the watch of 2 deputies from the next county. No fight left in him. No allies either. Word had already spread beyond Ashwood about the Black Horse, the brave townsfolk, and the drifter who wouldn't back down. Near the fence post, something fluttered in the wind. Ethan noticed it and walked over, brushing the top rail. His fingers closed around a strand of coarse black hair, long, thick, unmistakably from a horse. It was tangled between 2 splinters, as if caught mid-gallop. He stared at it, the memory of thunderous hooves and gleaming eyes flashing behind his lids. Maybe it had been a trick, maybe just a tale. Or maybe, just maybe, some spirits didn't need understanding, only respect. He slipped the strand into his vest pocket. Behind him, Eli shouted something to Martha. Laughter bubbled from the porch. Amos muttered a curse about lazy bones as he straightened up to help unload supplies. Ethan turned his eyes eastward. A narrow path led out of town, winding into the hills. The wind stirred again, soft and warm. He didn't know what came next, but for the first time in a long while, he wasn't running from anything. He was walking toward something, and that made all the difference. Sometimes what begins as a myth leads us to truths far deeper than we ever expected. Ethan didn't just chase a shadow through the prairie. He stood against fear, against injustice, and proved that courage isn't the absence of danger, but the will to face it when no one else will. In every town, in every life, there's a Black Stallion, a mystery we fear, a lie we've been told, a truth we avoid. The question is, will we follow it? Because doing the right thing won't always make you popular, but it will make you free. The winds of the West don't remember the loudest voice, but the bravest heart. If this story moved you even just a little, drop a press 1 in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to True Wild West Stories so you never miss a tale of grit, ghosts, and gunpowder justice.